Orders came just after midnight. The trench was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural after weeks of artillery and rifle fire. Men whispered instead of speaking, checking bayonets, tightening straps, making sure nothing rattled. Tonight, we weren't waiting for shells. Tonight, we were going out into no man's land, my first patrol. The lieutenant crouched beside us, his face barely visible beneath the dim lantern light. Our job was simple in words and terrifying in reality. Slip across the wire, scout enemy positions, listen for movement, and return before dawn. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. No heroics. If spotted, run or fight quietly. Above all, don't get lost. The battlefield between lines was a maze of craters and corpses, and men had wandered into enemy trenches by mistake before. Some never came back. My stomach twisted as we climbed the firing step. The sandbags were slick with moisture, and the cold air hit my face as I peered over the parapet. Ahead lay a shattered wasteland, illuminated only by occasional flares drifting slowly down from distant guns. The land between us and the Germans looked like the surface of the moon. Nothing but shell holes, broken trees, and coils of barbed wire twisted into monstrous shapes. Somewhere out there, men waited in trenches just like ours, rifles pointed in our direction. One by one, we climbed over. My boots sank immediately into mud, cold water seeping through the leather as I crouched low and followed the man ahead of me. No talking now, only hand signals and careful steps. Every movement felt too loud. My breathing sounded thunderous in my own ears. I tried to step where the others stepped, careful not to kick loose metal or stumble into wire that might clang and betray us. The smell hit me next. Rotting earth mixed with something worse. Bodies lay half buried where earlier battles had left them, uniforms barely visible under mud. Some were ours, some German, and many were impossible to tell. The ground itself seemed poisoned by months of fighting. Every crater we passed held stagnant water, sometimes reflecting the faint light of distant explosions, sometimes hiding shapes beneath the surface that I tried not to look at too closely. Halfway across, a flare burst overhead, turning night into pale daylight. Instinct took over. We froze and dropped flat into the mud. My heart pounded so hard, I was sure the enemy could hear it. The light drifted slowly downward, illuminating the broken landscape. For a moment, every detail stood out. Barbed wire shadows, shattered rifles, torn equipment, and the unmoving forms scattered across the ground. I pressed my face into the mud, barely daring to breathe. Somewhere off to our right, a machine gun rattled briefly, firing at something unseen. Dirt kicked up in the distance, and then silence returned. The flare burned out, darkness swallowing us again. My hands trembled as I lifted my head. The patrol leader motioned forward. No turning back now. We moved again, slower than before. Every shadow seemed alive. My imagination filled the darkness with enemy patrols creeping toward us, bayonets fixed. I imagined stumbling into a German listening post, men rising from the mud just feet away. Fear crawled up my spine, but training kept my legs moving. Step, pause, listen, step again. Survival here depended on patience. Ahead, we reached the tangled remains of enemy wire, blasted apart by artillery, but still dangerous. The lead scout carefully lifted strands aside, and we slipped through one at a time. Now we were closer to their lines than our own. The thought made my skin crawl. One shout, one cough, one careless movement, and rifles would open up on us from 100 yards away. Lying there in the cold mud, listening to distant voices speaking German somewhere ahead, the truth hit me with full force. This was war stripped of noise and glory. Just frightened men crawling through darkness, hoping the enemy didn't notice them first. My first patrol into no man's land had only begun, and already it felt like the longest night of my life. We crawled the last stretch on our stomachs, dragging rifles and packs through mud that soaked through every layer of clothing. The ground felt alive beneath us, vibrating faintly from distant guns still firing along other parts of the front. Somewhere miles away, the main offensive thundered on, but here the war felt quieter and somehow more dangerous. Noise gave warning, silence gave none. The patrol leader raised his fist, and we stopped. Ahead, barely visible in the darkness, lay the German forward trench line. It wasn't more than 50 yards away now, close enough that I could hear voices drifting through the night. Low murmurs, boots shifting, metal clanking softly. Enemy soldiers, awake and watchful, just like us. My mouth went dry. The idea that men sat so close, men who would gladly kill us at first sight, made my skin prickle. Every sense sharpened. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the cold mud against my cheek, smell damp earth and the faint odor of smoke drifting from their lines. We spread out behind the torn remains of shell craters, each man watching a different angle. Our job was to observe, to count machine gun nests if possible, note wire damage, listen for troop movement, anything useful for the attack planned at dawn. I peered slowly over the crater's edge. The German trench appeared as a dark scar across the land, reinforced with timber and sandbags. Occasionally, a helmet moved along the parapet. A cigarette glowed briefly before being crushed out. They were tense too. No one slept easily on this front. Then, somewhere to our left, a metallic snap shattered the silence. One of our men had snagged loose wire. It rang out softly, but in the stillness it sounded like a church bell. Every muscle in my body locked. For several seconds nothing happened. Then voices rose from the German line. Orders barked, boots scrambled, a flare gun popped. "Down!" someone hissed. The sky burst white again as the flare climbed overhead. We flattened into the mud, pressing ourselves against the earth as light spilled across no man's land. My breath caught in my throat. If they saw us, rifles and machine guns would cut this field apart. A German machine gun opened suddenly, spraying fire across the battlefield, but not at us. They'd spotted movement elsewhere, maybe another patrol or just nerves firing blind. Tracer rounds streaked across the darkness, stitching glowing lines above the craters. Dirt spat upward nearby, and I felt fragments pepper my helmet. The noise felt deafening after so much silence. My hands shook as I clutched my rifle, waiting for bullets to start tearing into our position. But the firing slowed, then stopped. The flare burned out. Darkness returned once more. No one moved for what felt like forever. Slowly, the patrol leader crawled along the line, whispering for us to hold position. The Germans, thinking they'd scared off whatever they heard, settled back into uneasy quiet. Minutes crawled past. My elbows and knees throbbed from holding still in the freezing mud. Every instinct screamed to run back to safety, but discipline kept me in place. This information mattered. The attack at dawn depended on men like us surviving long enough to bring back what we saw. I listened carefully now. Wagons moved somewhere behind the German line. Voices carried orders. Shovels scraped. Reinforcements, maybe. Or new defenses being built. Details the officers needed to know. But the longer we stayed, the greater the risk. Patrols sometimes stumbled into each other out here, and those meetings ended fast and brutally. Knife fights in the dark, No warning, no mercy. The patrol leader finally motioned the signal we'd all been waiting for. Time to pull back. Relief surged through me, quickly replaced by fresh fear. Crossing no man's land once was bad enough. Crossing it again, knowing the enemy was alert, felt even worse. We turned slowly, retracing our path through mud and wire, hoping nothing out there had noticed us. Behind us, German voices drifted across the darkness, unaware of how close we had come. But the night was not finished with us yet. We had barely begun crawling back when everything started to unravel. The return always felt longer, more dangerous. Going forward, fear pushes you on. Going back, exhaustion and relief make mistakes easier. And in no man's land, mistakes get men killed. We moved slowly, keeping low, following the faint path our patrol leader had chosen earlier. Shell craters looked different from this angle, shadows shifting in ways that confused the eye. More than once I nearly crawled the wrong way before the man ahead motioned me back on course. It struck me how easy it would be to get turned around in the darkness, to stumble straight into enemy trenches without realizing it until rifles were already pointed at your chest. Then the night exploded again. A flare shot upward somewhere behind us, followed immediately by shouting in German. This time it was close, too close. My stomach dropped. They'd sent out a patrol of their own. "Patrol! Down!" someone hissed. We flattened instantly, pressing into the mud. The flare climbed, bathing everything in sickly white light. And there they were, shapes moving not 30 yards away. German soldiers creeping through the darkness just like us, rifles slung low, helmets barely visible above the mud. For a few seconds, neither side seemed to understand what they were seeing. Two patrols colliding in the dark, each thinking the ground ahead was empty. Then someone moved too quickly. A rifle fired. The night shattered into chaos. Shots cracked from both sides, muzzle flashes stabbing through the darkness. A man beside me screamed as a bullet hit him, his body jerking violently before collapsing into the mud. I fired without aiming, pure instinct taking over, the recoil jolting my frozen arms. "Back! Fall back!" someone yelled. But falling back was easier said than done. Men scrambled for cover, slipping into craters, tripping over wire. Bullets snapped overhead, kicking up dirt around us. A German grenade arced through the darkness and exploded behind our line, showering mud and fragments into the air. My ears rang, and for a moment I heard nothing but a high whine. Training vanished. Survival took over. I crawled blindly toward the direction of our lines, heart hammering, lungs burning. Somewhere to my right, two figures grappled in the mud, one of ours, one German, locked in a desperate struggle. A knife flashed briefly before both disappeared into a crater. There was no time to help, no time to think. Another flare burst overhead, and suddenly we were all exposed. Americans and Germans alike, scrambling through the same torn landscape. Machine guns opened from somewhere behind enemy lines, spraying bullets across the field. Tracers streaked past, bright lines slicing the darkness. I dove into a shell hole just as rounds chewed into the ground where I'd been crawling seconds before. Mud splashed into my face. My chest heaved as I fought to stay calm. All around, men shouted in English and German, voices tangled in panic. This wasn't the quiet scouting mission we'd been promised. This was survival in its rawest form. The patrol leader appeared beside my crater, his face streaked with mud. He jerked his thumb toward our lines. Time to run. We burst from cover, sprinting in short, desperate bursts between craters. My boots slipped, nearly sending me face first into the mud. Bullets snapped overhead, and somewhere behind us, German voices shouted in pursuit. Ahead, our own trench loomed in darkness. Friendly voices called out challenges. Someone threw a rope down, hauling men over the parapet as fast as they arrived. I stumbled forward, arms grabbing my coat and dragging me back into safety, just as another burst of machine gun fire tore across the ground behind us. Breathing hard, shaking uncontrollably, I collapsed against the trench wall. Around me, survivors trickled in, but not everyone returned. My first patrol into no man's land had lasted less than an hour, and already men were missing. We counted the men as they came back over the parapet, each face ghostly in the fading darkness. Some stumbled in silence, others cursed under their breath, adrenaline still burning through them. A few were wounded, uniforms torn and soaked with mud and blood. Medics moved quickly, dragging the injured aside, whispering reassurances none of us truly believed. But the count stopped short. 3 men didn't return. No one said their names out loud. No one needed to. We all knew who was missing. The spaces they should have filled in the trench felt heavier than the bodies of those who made it back. In war, absence is louder than presence. The lieutenant crouched with the patrol leader, quietly gathering information. Machine gun positions, movement behind enemy lines, damaged wire sections. Everything we'd seen mattered now. Within hours, thousands of American troops would push forward in the offensive, and what we risked our lives to learn might save some of them. That knowledge was the only thing that made the patrol feel like more than pointless terror. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Even after the shooting stopped, even after the Germans faded back into darkness, my body refused to calm down. Every sudden sound made me flinch. Somewhere farther down the trench, artillery thundered again, signaling the start of the coming assault. The ground trembled, and for a moment I felt like I was still out there, lying in the mud with bullets cracking overhead. Dawn crept slowly across the battlefield, revealing the wasteland we had crawled through only hours before. Through periscope slits and gaps in sandbags, I saw no man's land clearly for the first time. It was worse in daylight. Craters filled with murky water, coils of shattered wire, abandoned equipment scattered everywhere. Bodies lay motionless where patrols, assaults, and bombardments had left them. Some were recent. Others had been there so long they seemed part of the landscape. That was where our missing men were now, somewhere in that torn ground between armies. Maybe wounded, hiding in a crater, praying for darkness to return. Maybe already gone. Patrols rarely went back out after sunrise. Daylight belonged to snipers and artillery. Anyone caught moving out there became an easy target. The realization settled heavily in my chest. War did not give second chances. One wrong turn, one flare at the wrong time, one foot caught in wire, and a man vanished into the mud. Yet as the sun climbed, something else took hold alongside fear. Survival. We had gone into no man's land and come back alive. That alone felt like victory, even if it was a small one. The older soldiers nodded at us differently now, their expressions less dismissive. We'd crossed a line every soldier eventually faced, the moment when war stopped being stories and became something personal. Orders soon spread along the trench. Prepare for attack. Rifles checked. Ammunition distributed. Men ate quickly, some forcing down food despite shaking hands. The offensive was beginning, and there was no time left to think about the night's losses. I cleaned mud from my rifle, movement slow and deliberate. Around me, the trench filled with tension again. Officers shouted instructions. Runners sprinted between positions. Artillery roared overhead, shells screaming toward enemy lines to soften defenses before the advance. I glanced once more toward the ruined field ahead. Only hours earlier, I'd crawled through that darkness, convinced every step might be my last. Now, in daylight, thousands of us would cross it together. Fear still gripped me, but it no longer paralyzed. It sharpened. War wasn't about bravery the way posters back home claimed. It was about endurance, continuing forward even when every instinct told you to hide. The whistle for the coming assault would blow soon. Men around me fixed bayonets, their faces grim but determined. I took a slow breath, steadying my hands. My first patrol into no man's land was over. The real battle was about to begin.